What's good, everybody? It's Robo back with another video, and today I've got my college football week 9 picks. We've got 56 FBS games, and I'm going over every single one of them. It's looking like another loaded slate of games, but before I go into everything, let me go ahead and recap the week 8 results. Week 8 was an up and down one for the picks. We got some great games as well, but overall I went just above 500 at 30, 28, and 1 against the spread. A few surprising performances and some tough beats, but that's all part of the game. Heading into week 9, we're still looking strong on the year, so without further ado, let's go ahead and keep building and get started in order kickoff time as usual. Kicking off the week Tuesday night, it's Vice night at Florida International as they host Sam Houston State. For the Bearcats, quarterback Hunter Watson is listed as QB1, but with a day-to-day designation. They still haven't announced if he'll play officially, though, as his top target, Noah Smith, is also likely out for this one as well. If both were healthy, I'd assume this line would be double digits, but those are two huge injuries for this team. Lucky for them, though, FIU is just a bad football team who just lost to a winless UTEP. I picked that, though, last week, and I still think Sam Houston's a better team regardless, especially with DJ McKinney's ability on the ground. As long as Watson plays healthy enough, I like Sam Houston to cover as road favorites, 27-20. Louisiana Tech fell last week on the road to New Mexico State, with inconsistent play across the board costing them. This week they're hosting a UTEP team coming off their very first win of the season over FIU, despite being 7-point underdogs. But I don't have much confidence in that success continuing, even against another bad opponent. They just haven't shown up on the road, and I'm expecting a better night from Louisiana Tech playing at home again. Probably not as strong as the Middle Tennessee game 2 weeks ago, but enough offense to take care of UTEP. I've got Tech taking this one, 34-24. Moving to Wednesday, we've got Liberty at Kennesaw State. Kennesaw is still battling for their first win as an FBS program, and they're most likely not going to get it here as Liberty comes in as near 4-touchdown road favorites. This spread is massive, but honestly, I'm not too big of a fan of it. Liberty hasn't been blowing anybody out this year and has a really easy schedule to this point this season. Kennesaw is obviously a coverable game, but on the road, I'm not going to count on it. Liberty's largest margin of victory is 18 at home against UTEP, and I think just 4 touchdowns on the road is a bit too much. Give me Kennesaw to cover that, but Liberty big, 31-13. Jacksonville State takes on Middle Tennessee this week, and their offense is still absolutely dominating. They've now had 3 straight wins with 44 points or more in all 3 games. The Middle Tennessee defense has been decent at times, but gave up 48 to Louisiana Tech a couple weeks ago and is obviously capable of getting gashed this season. With how well they've played, I'm just not picking against a Jacksonville State team this hot, especially at home against a 2-win team that doesn't match up the best with them. Give me Jacksonville State here big, 41-14. Thursday could be a good one, starting with an extremely tough game to pick, Georgia Southern at Old Dominion. Both of these teams are coming off big upset wins over James Madison and Texas State respectively. Old Dominion is always competitive, especially this season, and they've leaned on their defense a lot in big games. Georgia Southern's defense hasn't been incredible, but they controlled James Madison quite a bit, and the offense put up 400 yards on the day. This is a true toss-up to me, and Old Dominion is playing at home here, but I still believe Georgia Southern is the better team in this game, and I really like what I've seen out of them lately. I've got Georgia Southern on the road close, 27-24. On to the bigger Thursday matchup, another super tough game to pick, Syracuse at Pitt. Pitt has been real solid this season thanks to a decent defense and a breakout year from Eli Holstein in the offense. But Kyle McCord has been balling himself and has put Cuse in a great spot as well this year. Both teams are coming off a bye week, so no advantages there. Pitt's looking to keep an undefeated season alive and well, and I really do like Eli Holstein. But I'm going to continue to put my faith in Kyle McCord as the more experienced quarterback with more big games under his belt. The Cuse passing game hasn't been slowed down yet, and Pitt's pass D has been a little bit suspect this year. I'm going to go with Cuse on the road, 34-30. On to Friday, Louisville heads up to Boston College. This Boston College team got flat out dominated by Virginia Tech last week. Turnovers are really what allowed them to get back in that game, just for them to get blown out again when the Hokies settle back in. They're struggling on both ends right now pretty significantly, and Louisville proved last week they can hang around with the best in the conference, or even the country in Miami. Even on the road, I think the Cardinal offense will continue to roll here, as Boston College doesn't pose much of a threat to me right now. I like Louisville by 10, 30-20. Up next is a game I can't wait to watch, Boise State at UNLV. UNLV playing at home poses a real threat to Boise State's playoff chances, but at the same time, Ashton Jeanty can make a huge statement for his Heisman resume with yet another big game here against a quality opponent. This is a great matchup in the Mountain West, and although I think UNLV could have some shot factor in them with an elite playmaker themselves and Ricky White, I think Boise State's offense is more than equipped to land the Group of 5 playoff spot this season, and they've seemed completely locked in on achieving that to this point. Nobody's even come close to slowing down Ashton Jeanty, and I think he carries the Broncos to another win here, 34-27. The final weekday game is Rutgers at USC. Both of these teams are in the gutter right now. USC falling to Maryland on a block kick leading to a game-winning drive, and Rutgers now suffering back-to-back-to-back losses, with the last 2 being brutal ones. Cal Lake managed just as bad lately as I thought he would be coming into the year, and Kyle Monangai is doing everything he can to carry the offense. I don't see how they'll be able to change any of the recent play much, having to travel across the country to face USC, who is just better than the UCLA team Rutgers just lost to at home. But laying over 2 touchdowns is a bit too much for me with how much I expect Rutgers to run the ball this week, as well as trying to get back to their ways of winning ugly. but I don't think it lasts long enough for an upset here. Give me USC 34-21. On to Saturday, it's Nebraska at Ohio State. Nebraska got their doors blown off by Indiana last week, 56-7. They completely gave up on that one, and Indiana absolutely steamrolled them, even when Curtis Rourke went down. Ohio State simply has a chance to do the exact same thing this week as just a much better football team. I don't expect it to be as bad as last week because football can be so game to game, and Nebraska will probably come out a lot more alive. But I think Ohio State comes into this one pissed off from the Oregon loss after the bye week and makes a statement with a blowout win here, 38-10. Navy's been giving out the belt on a weekly basis to lower level teams all season long and also took down a solid Memphis team in the process and is still undefeated, making this a ranked matchup this week with Notre Dame. Notre Dame is rolling themselves and handled a decent Georgia Tech team last week. No Haynes King for Tech obviously helped their case though, as Zach Pyron just isn't the same guy for that team. For this game, I just think Navy's offense has been way too tough to stop this season to trust Notre Dame to blow them out on the road. Navy's defense hasn't been great this season, and I do expect Notre Dame to score in this game, but give me Navy to cover with enough production from that offense, 35-24. On to where college game day is at this week. Washington at Indiana from Bloomington. Some tough news this week for the Hoosiers as starting quarterback Curtis Rourke is going to miss potentially a few weeks with a thumb injury. But Taven Jackson looked really good last week in relief of him. As a former top recruit, he should have the confidence coming into this game and a bit of a rhythm with a super hot supporting cast around him. Washington's not a great team this season, but they've shown up on occasion. I do think Washington scores more than Nebraska did last week with a veteran quarterback, but there's no way I'm going against Indiana after what we saw last week on both sides of the ball. I like the Hoosiers 31-21. Oklahoma's been an absolute disaster offensively this season, and a lot of it has to do with the receiver injuries and poor play from the young quarterbacks. But last week was a disaster, getting blown out at home by South Carolina. Brent Venables is going back to Jackson Arnold, who arguably had the offense in a better spot than Hawkins has had the past few games. And then we have a new play caller as well, as they fired offensive coordinator Seth Luttrell. I think that might cause a little bit of optimism in the Sooner program heading into a game they have pretty much nothing to lose in. 3 touchdown dogs to one of the best teams in the country on the road. I don't see why they wouldn't try some stuff and hope to gain some momentum. I think Ole Miss is fantastic, but I'm going to take Oklahoma to cover here with Arnold back at quarterback. 34-17 Rebels. Georgia Tech is on the road this week at a surging Virginia Tech Hokie team, and they'll be at a disadvantage again as Hayne Kings was ruled out for this game again. Zach Pyron didn't look great at all against Notre Dame, but I don't think this Georgia Tech team is too far off from Virginia Tech in talent to warrant near 2 touchdown underdogs despite the quarterback injury. Kyron Drones is red hot lately though, and if the Hokies avoid turnovers this week, they could win this game without much of a sweat. It's a tough call for me though, because I do really like Georgia Tech's run game still, but Virginia Tech is on fire. I think knowing the quarterback situation, Georgia Tech does lean on the ground game enough to find points and stay in it late, but Virginia Tech takes the win at home, 31-24. On to UNC at Virginia. North Carolina's coming off a bye week, but the defense was still struggling beforehand, giving up 41 to Georgia Tech and 34 to Pitt. They've given up over 30 points a game this season and are sitting on a 4-game losing streak. Virginia comes into this one after genuinely competing with Clemson despite the 3-score loss, and I think Virginia's passing game has looked good enough this year to trust they'll be able to do more of the same on North Carolina's defense. If UNC comes out of the bye refreshed and looking much different from what they've seen this season, they've got an obvious shot here, but I just can't trust that to happen with how they've played, and Virginia's defense has been more than quality enough to think they'll get stops they need to win this game at home. 34-27. Buffalo proved once again last week how unpredictable the MAC can be, from beating Toledo at home to the very next week giving up nearly 50 points to Western Michigan in a loss. Games like these will continue to be tough picks, and this week it's no different as they're on the road at Ohio. Parker Navarro has been pretty consistently solid this year up until last week where he was benched due to poor play. They're sticking with him though, as he's still their guy, and I think it's the right choice. It's been a weird year in the conference, and he's done enough to keep the job at this point to me. I think Buffalo has shown enough to believe they'll hang around this one too, maybe even pull off the road upset, but I gotta go with Ohio here close, 27-23. Next is Memphis taking on Charlotte, a chance for Seth Hennigan to really showcase his ability as one of the best quarterbacks in the group of 5. Charlotte just gave up 51 to a very good Navy team, but it's clear the defense is not a strong suit of this Charlotte group, and Memphis has the offense to do something real similar to last week's game. They finally got hot offensively last week. The Memphis defense looked rough, but this isn't one of the best offenses in the country with North Texas. It's Charlotte. I think Memphis is able to handle business big here, 41-20. Tulane had a bit of a rough go last week coming off the bye week beating Rice by just 14. The offense seemed a little out of sync and really struggled through the air, and despite a 5-turnover day from Rice, still weren't able to capitalize enough to cover the spread. This week could prove to be a bit easier though, as although they're on the road, they're going up against a North Texas defense ranked in the bottom 15 in the country in both yards and points allowed. They just gave up 52 to a Memphis team that's fairly similar to Tulane statistically. Now yes, North Texas is also one of the country's best offenses, but Tulane's defense has been pretty good this season, and a lot of North Texas success has been because of their up-tempo nature of play. I think Tulane brings enough defense on the road to hold the Mean Green under their usual numbers, which they rely on so heavily, which will help Tulane cover a spread just over a touchdown, 37-27. No Jaquindon Jackson this week for Arkansas as they hit the road to take on Mississippi State, which means this will be a big chance for freshman back Braylon Russell. I like what we've seen out of him, but at the same time, I really think Mississippi State has looked much more competitive the past few weeks, and they could see this Arkansas team as really vulnerable. I still like Taylon Green, but he struggles with decision makings on his passes, and I think we saw last week they just aren't good enough to really trust much on the road here. As long as they can keep pressure off Michael Van Buren, I like the odds of picking the home dog here outright, and that's what I'm going to do. Give me the Bulldogs to pick up their first win in the SEC, 30-24. Georgia State heads to Appalachian State for their third game in 14 days. Now that does include a 9-day gap between this and last week, but it can still add up. App State's off a bye week looking to reshape the season, coming off 3 straight losses. But they look better in the last one against Louisiana. They had a chance to steal that game, but 4 picks from Aguilar and a last-minute score ruined that one. But like I mentioned, this could be a case of a well-timed bye. This team is out of rhythm and could use a little reset. Georgia State is a better football team than the record showed and beat Vanderbilt this season, but coming off 3 losses as well, I think App State has a good chance to finally move forward. I think they pick up a win at home, but Georgia State's offense is solid enough to take advantage of a weaker defense to keep it close. I'll go 31-28. Miami, Ohio is finally getting in a rhythm now off another win in the MAC over Ohio last week, and are still at home taking on Central Michigan. They've leaned on their defense dominating the last 2 weeks. 2 late scores kind of hindered performance they got out of the group yet again last week, and I really don't think Central has enough to really change that here away from home. Miami still has 3 of the best defenders in the conference and should be able to limit the run game more than Eastern Michigan was able to. And even with a great day on the ground, the Central defense gave up way too much to win, and Brett Gabbert is starting to look much more efficient at the right time. I think Miami, Ohio gets production offensively to handle CMU at home by 2 scores, 31-17. East Carolina takes on Temple this week at home right after firing head coach Mike Houston. From what I've seen, the ECU players don't seem overly thrilled with that decision, and the firing is kind of weird to me as I think they looked much better this season and had a pretty easy end of schedule to reach a bowl game this year. A big improvement from last season no matter what. There could be some locker room issues to watch out for here, and Temple's gotten better since the start of the year now with Evan Simon playing decent at quarterback. He should be even healthier this week as well, and I think they've got a real shot here, although ECU is probably the better football team still, and it is homecoming. I'm going to take ECU to survive a close one, 28-24. Oregon took care of Purdue last week on the road with a dominant defensive performance, shutting out a team who just hung 49 on Illinois the week prior. And now this week they're back in Eugene taking on that Illinois team who's coming off a massive win over Michigan. Obviously not the same Michigan team we've gotten used to seeing, but still a big win for the program. I thought Michigan really lost that game themselves, though, with turnovers and just horrendous offensive play, and it doesn't give me much confidence Illinois can hang around with Oregon, especially with how the Ducks have played lately. Dylan Gabriel's one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country, and the Oregon defense is going to give Illinois much more problems than Michigan did. I think this one ends up in a blowout by the end of it as well, 41-17 Oregon. On to BYU at UCF, a big game in the Big 12 this week. The Ja'Cory Brown and RJ Harvey rushing duo was unbelievable against Iowa State, and the defense came to play forcing turnovers, but a couple big mistakes cost them the upset. BYU remained undefeated last week despite a big threat from Oklahoma State taking the lead with just over a minute to go. Ollie Gordon was fantastic, but BYU battled and showed a ton of resilience on that last drive, making some huge plays to finish it off. After last week, I definitely think UCF has a shot here, but BYU just continues to get it done. If they play out of character defensively again and allow UCF to run all over them, they'll be back on upset alert. But I trust them enough on that side of the ball to think they'll continue the run. Give me BYU on the road, 30-21. Alabama is back home taking on Missouri this week, with Jalen Milroe really off his game lately and in need of a sharp performance here. For Missouri, Brady Cook is pretty banged up right now, but came back and finished off Auburn, showing a lot of resilience. As of right now, it's really hard to trust Bama to handle this game well with how the offense is playing. They're pretty out of sync to me, and Missouri may have gotten a rhythm late, which could be huge for this game. I definitely think Missouri has a chance at an upset here, but still just think Bama is too talented and can get it together to bounce back in front of their home crowd. It probably won't come easy, but I've got Alabama by a touchdown here, 31-24. Iowa is back home this week taking on Northwestern, with both teams looking to bounce back from rough road losses. Iowa again proved the offense is still a rough spot last week. I just don't think it's good enough to win this game in blowout fashion unless they hold Northwestern at 10 points or less. That's definitely possible, though, as we saw last week as Wisconsin held them to 3, but I do think Northwestern finds the end zone this week and makes it a bit tougher on Iowa to cover. They have a defense strong enough to keep Iowa under 30 points here. As long as they show up, I do like getting the full 2 touchdowns on the Northwestern side. I think Iowa continues to struggle to score this week after the loss and wins a low-scoring battle with a good defensive play, 23-13. Minnesota takes on Maryland this week, fresh off a bye week after taking down both LA schools to get to 4-3 on the year. And Maryland coming off a huge win over USC with a blocked field goal that led to the game-winning touchdown. I think from what we've seen, these two teams can be considered fairly even, but with much different styles of play. Maryland generates the majority of their offense through the air and defensively hasn't been great. And Minnesota's been pretty poor offensively, but has one of the nation's best pass defenses, are in a top 10 overall in scoring defense. That matchup's absolutely going to decide who wins this game, and I really think Minnesota's secondary will be able to come out on top here. I think it's a tough test, but one that Gophers defense passes, especially at home, 27-21. Next is Rice at UConn. UConn kind of disappointed me last week with a really slow start, but they nearly pulled off the win over Wake Forest in that game still. And although that Wake team is rough, I just don't think they're in the same realm as Rice. Outside of one or two solid showings this season, Rice has looked pretty terrible. This should be a solid win for UConn to me, especially if they start off with a better foot. Like I said, Rice has had a semi-decent last 2 weeks, but I just don't think they'll go on the road and play well again here. I got UConn by double digits here, 31-20. Wake Forest heads across the country to take on Stanford in a matchup of simply two horrendous Power 5 teams. Wake nearly fell last week to UConn, even after a great start. I did pick them to lose that one, though, but they've proven they're not much better than the below-average group of 5 teams at this point. Stanford's getting blown out left and right by great teams this season, but finally gets a chance at an easier one at home. They've got pretty much zero resemblance of an offense right now, but I expect them to at least show up for this one. Wake's defense has been bad all year, and teams have struggled across the country all year long. I think Stanford can straight up win this game if they take care of the football, and give me Stanford to do exactly that, 30-27. Oklahoma State's offense finally came alive last week at BYU and nearly helped them pull off the upset to end BYU's undefeated season, but a late collapse from the defense handed the Cowboys yet another loss. They just cannot stop the run whatsoever, and even in crunch time folded against the pass as well. This week they're back on the road at Baylor. Baylor's coming off a really strong road win over Texas Tech where they dropped nearly 60 on them with 250 plus in the air and on the ground. With an offense that hot, I expect the fireworks to continue again this week, but defensively the Bears haven't been great themselves. I don't think they're going to stop Oklahoma State too much either, especially if Ollie Gordon runs the way he did against BYU. I think we could get a mini shootout and Baylor comes out on top close, 37-31. Continuing with Texas Tech, what an embarrassing defensive showing last week at home with Baylor. And not really uncharacteristic because they've been giving up big points all year long besides a couple games. TCU has been really up and down this season, taking down Kansas and Utah without rising, but losing to Houston and UCF at home as well as an ugly loss to SMU. This one's going to be another tough one with knowing what to expect. What TCU team do we see show up? Last week's strong defensive day or the team who lost to Houston in their own building? I think we see a ton of offense, and I expect a bit better out of Texas Tech. And this also won't be anything like a Utah offense. So I think TCU wins a shootout, 38-35. James Madison put together another terrible performance last week, losing to Georgia Southern on the road. This is twice now they've struggled big time on the road against lesser teams. At home, though, they've been absolutely dominant, especially against poor defenses. Southern Miss has given up a ton of points this season and even sparked some struggling offenses. I think the Dukes are just a different group playing at home, and I don't see a repeat struggle from JMU at all here. Although the line is way up there, they've proven they can win games by 30-plus on several occasions this season. I think JMU does it again to rebound from that loss, 42-14. Eastern Michigan was in a battle last week against in-state rival Central Michigan, but they helped me out with a late comeback win to put themselves one win away from bowl eligibility. This week's a great chance to secure that playing one of the worst teams in the MAC in Akron. It's on the road though, and as we've seen, this conference has been all over the place this season. I definitely wouldn't rule out an Akron upset here as EMU just doesn't have a good defense at all. But with what they're fighting for and the resilience we saw last week, I think they'll take care of just a very poor Akron squad whose sole win on the year came against Colgate. I've got the Eagles 31-23. Northern Illinois fell at home to a real good Toledo team last week. A tough game as I expected and really low scoring as both defenses came to play. This week they'll hit the road with a much easier task heading out to Ball State, who sits at 2-5 with the lone conference win coming over Kent State by just 2 points. Ball State competed with Vanderbilt last week though, which I'll mention more later on, but I think has less to do with Ball State. Maybe NIU has another rough game here on the road, but this late in the season I would expect a bounce back game, especially offensively against a really subpar MAC opponent. I think NIU gets their get back in a strong way, 27-10. Toledo got back in the win column, taking down Northern Illinois on the road, cashing the underdog pick for me in a really low-scoring affair. And just like last week, I like this matchup for the Rockets again. Bowling Green has some great talents in Fannin and Stewart, especially with Fannin being a potential Mackey finalist. But I still believe Toledo is the team to beat in the MAC and should be again able to lean on the defense and control the game enough to take care of home field and stay towards the top of the MAC standings. Last week was proof they're capable of winning this conference, and I think they pass another tough test at home, 27-21. Continuing on with our fourth straight MAC game, it's Kent State at Western Michigan. Kent State's now 0-7 after another loss last week against Bowling Green. A tough game where absolutely nothing worked through the air as Tommy Ulatowski was just 7 for 27 with 2 picks. That's a recipe for disaster in every way, shape, or form, but somehow they only lost by 3 scores. Western Michigan surprised me last week, hanging 48 on Buffalo on the road, and their offense continues to be red hot 3 weeks in a row now. Kent State simply isn't going to slow them down enough to avoid an 8th straight loss of the season, but I do think Western's defenses look bad enough to expect Kent State to have a bit better day here. I think they just barely sneak a road cover as Western wins 38-23. UTSA finally picked up another win last week, taking care of FAU at home with a great day on both sides of the ball aside from turnovers. This week they're back on the road, though, where they've struggled big time this season, but it'll be against arguably the weakest opponent they've seen to this point besides Houston Christian. Tulsa's coming off 3 straight losses, blowouts from North Texas, Army, and last week's 10-point loss at Temple. This is simply a bad football team with an awful defense and not much consistency on the offensive end either. I think we've seen better play out at UTSA basically all season long, and this is where UTSA can put together a good enough performance to grab their first road win and pull it even 4-4 on the year. 31-21. On to Oregon State at Cal. Cal's on a 4-game losing streak to 3 great teams, but then last week falling at home to a very poor NC State team. They allowed way too much from CJ Bailey through the air and continue to struggle turning drives into touchdowns instead of field goals. Oregon State has lost 2 in a row to Mountain West teams, but competed with a solid UNLV team. I definitely think this is a game Cal should win, especially if Jaden Ott is good to go. But after the touchdown struggles and falling at home to a team struggling that badly, I don't want to lay double digits in this game. I've got Cal by a touchdown, 30-23. We've got a special SEC matchup this week, a ranked Vanderbilt team hosting number 5 Texas. Vanderbilt this season seems to be a team who just plays at the level of their competition, taking a loss to Georgia State, competing with Missouri, beating Bama, and then last week struggling with Ball State. Texas coming off a tough loss to Georgia where they simply were outplayed. They could come in this one super fired up to put it behind them, but I just think Vandy at home, being ranked for the first time in over a decade, will again play the level of their competition long enough to hang around and cover a near 3-touchdown spread. But ultimately, I just don't see them beating Texas coming off that Georgia loss. I've got the Horns 34-20. New Mexico enters this week's road matchup with Colorado State sporting a 3-game winning streak, with 50 points scored in all 3 wins thanks to a dynamic run game. That was against 3 very bad defenses though, some of the worst teams in the entire country. Colorado State just simply has better talent than their last 3, especially when it comes to slowing down the run game. The Rams are sitting at 4-3 on the year, but haven't looked impressive much at all this season, and obviously no Torrey Horton affected the offense a lot last week, becoming a bit more run dependent. The Rams have a great opportunity this season though, with a pretty easy conference schedule, so this is a must-win game here. It's homecoming, and I do think the clear defensive gap in this game is enough for Colorado State to win this one by at least a touchdown, 38-30. UL Monroe hits the road this week at South Alabama. Bryant Vincent has done such a great job this season with this ULM team, becoming a potential Coach of the Year candidate. ULM is 5-1 now, coming out of the bye with the lone loss coming to Texas. South Alabama's offense definitely can pose a significant challenge to this ULM defense, but they really haven't looked the same in recent games. Even last week with just 25 against Troy, they just weren't able to finish drives with touchdowns. ULM has suffocated some solid offensive teams already this season, and honestly, I expect this game to be a fairly low-scoring one as well. Winning on the road is always tough, though, and Gio Lopez has been good enough for me to think ULM falls just short, 24-20. Arizona takes on West Virginia this week. 2 dumpster fire teams right now with the way the season's gone compared to expectations. Both teams are just incredibly inconsistent. We've seen some great games from both and some absolutely awful ones as well. But I just have more faith in the Fafita-McMillan duo despite the serious interception problem Fafita's having this season. On top of being at home, I definitely think they can get it together enough to beat a spiraling West Virginia team who had to bench Garrett Green last week as his poor play continued for the Mountaineer offense. Something's got to change in this game for one of these teams, and if I had to guess, I'd say Arizona has to beat the team. I like the Wildcats here, 31-24. On to another rivalry game with Florida State heading to Miami. Florida State is just a disaster. They completely outplayed Duke in my opinion last week, but 5 turnovers on the night, including 3 on 3 consecutive plays, completely cost them the game. They were still in at the very end despite all those mishaps, and I think that's been the story all season. Just a badly disciplined football team making mistake after mistake. I have no reason to believe Miami won't pour it on them with the history between these 2 teams. Cam Ward's going to want to continue his Heisman candidacy this week with an emphatic win at home. I've got Miami 38-14. Utah at Houston could be one of the uglier games of the week to watch. The Utah offense beyond bleak, even with Rising in at quarterback. But now that he's done for the year, Isaac Wilson got the nod last week, and he couldn't do anything against TCU, who lost to this Houston team in blowout fashion. Houston is not good at all, though, and proved that last week getting destroyed by Kansas. But this Utah offense looks so bad, I think there's some real hope Houston can win this game at home under the lights. College football has been all over the place this season, and Utah needs this win desperately to avoid a continued spiral. And once again, I just don't think this Houston team is any good. The TCU win didn't change that for me, so give me Utah to have a better day on the ground and pick up a tough road win, 23-17. Utah State's on the road this week, taking on an awful Wyoming team who's just going to continue to run a 2-quarterback system in this game. As I've mentioned in the past, I'm not a fan of it unless you've shown it to work consistently, and neither guy for Wyoming has looked good at all. Utah State's defense is atrocious, though, so maybe it'll be a better day for the Cowboys, but I do know the Aggie offense should travel as they can put up some huge numbers. I don't think Wyoming's home field advantage is enough to outweigh the major gap between these 2 offenses this season, and Utah State's defense might finally find some success against an offense this bad. Give me Utah State as road underdogs outright, 33-27. Next is Arkansas State taking on Troy. Troy still has not beaten an FBS team now, sitting 1-6. Although lately the play has been a bit better than early on, this team still has a lot of issues on both ends. Arkansas State's coming off a blowout win at Southern Miss, but had a pretty rough up and down year with performances. They're back home this week where they're undefeated at, but in 3 games have won by a total margin of just 9 points. I think this is arguably the worst team in their schedule though, and the offense was really clicking last week leading into this one. So I think this could be pretty similar to last week for the Red Wolves. I've got Arkansas State covering at home, 30-21. On to another big game, this time in the Big Ten, number 3 Penn State at Wisconsin. I'm not a big believer in Penn State this season despite the undefeated record. Tyler Warren's an absolute monster though, and up there with Harold Fanner for the Mackey Award race right now. But he really was the entire offensive against USC a couple weeks ago, and I think Wisconsin has a defensive talent to try and keep the ball out of his hands as much as they can. We've really seen this Wisconsin team come on as of late, and I think they show up to this night game with a lot of confidence and ready to go. I definitely see this game as a potential upset of the week, and I like Wisconsin to cover this spread as near touchdown underdogs at home. But Penn State has a chance to do something special this season for the first time in a while, and they passed a tough test from USC prior to this. I think they win this one in similar fashion, 24-20. LSU at Texas A&M is a game of the week this week. 2 top 15 SEC teams going head-to-head, both on pretty solid runs as of late. Coming in with 6 straight wins from both sides, including some big-time rank wins at home. I had a pretty hard time picking this game with how strong I've seen this Aggie defense play at times and how efficient Wegman and the running backs look against Missouri. But LSU has really kicked it into a new gear, and that offensive line has just been incredible. Garrett Nussmeier is really coming along as a quarterback prospect, and I think he's got what it takes to continue balling in this game. Wade Weeks has emerged as a huge leader for the Tiger defense in the absence of Harold Perkins. Enough so that I'm going to trust the Tigers on the road against the 12th man this week. I've got LSU 27-23. It's hate week in Ann Arbor as Michigan State comes to town to take on a spiraling Wolverines team. We don't know for sure who's the quarterback for Michigan yet, but it looks like as of right now, Jack Tuttle will at least start the game. I thought Michigan's defense was more than fine against Illinois and gave them a realistic shot to win that game on the road, but an absolutely pitiful day cost them big time. Will Johnson sounds like he's good to go, which could be big as someone needs to cover Nick Marsh. Aiden Childs' turnover problem could be huge in this one because Michigan's offense will need as much help as they can get. I'm expecting an ugly, low-scoring game here, and as much as I want to, I just can't take Michigan to win with how pitiful the offense has been. MSU looked pretty good last week and has won here in the past. The Big House may have some low-spirited fans in attendance, so I'm taking Sparty outright, 20-17. Next is Auburn at Kentucky, 2 really spiraling SEC teams with horrendous offensive play, and last week the Kentucky defense collapsed as well, giving up 48 points to a true freshman quarterback. Auburn blew a 2-score lead to Missouri in the 4th quarter last week after Brady Cook returned from injury. Both of these teams are really tough to back right now and really all over the place, and this is Kentucky's last chance at an SEC win in front of their home crowd. I'm expecting an ugly, low-scoring game with a strong rebound performance from Kentucky's defense, and because of how good they've been all year leading into the last couple weeks, I'm still going to trust them to get the job done against Auburn here. Give me Kentucky close, 23-17. Kansas is finally alive, picking up a much-needed win over Houston last week in big-time blowout fashion. The defense was all over the field, and Jalen Daniels put together a really solid performance. This would be a tougher game for Kansas State than I thought a week ago, but on the other hand, Kansas State is not Houston, even in the slightest. They're playing this one at home, the fans will be amped up for a rivalry game, and one game doesn't change how Kansas looked all year long. I just can't help but think the Wildcats will be able to cover a spread down to just 10 points here. I think Avery Johnson has really hit his stride, and this team absolutely demolished West Virginia last week. Kansas will have to replicate last week's performance to take this one away from them, so give me Kansas State 37-21. SMU is on the road against Duke this week, and honestly, they've turned into an offensive wagon as of late. They're absolutely rolling on that end, putting up some elite performances lately. Duke picked up a hard-fought win over Florida State last week, but again remains as one of my more overrated teams in the country after a 5-turnover day from the Noles allowed them to escape that win. I generally thought Duke got outplayed in that game aside from the turnovers and mistakes from Florida State, and SMU has brought the offense on the road as well. Duke's defense is definitely tougher than some of the teams SMU has seen, but I don't think it's sharp enough to erase the clear gap that's been created between these two teams. I think SMU wins and covers again on the road, 34-20. Fresno State has had a little rough patch the last 3 weeks, falling to UNLV and Washington State and narrowly escaping Nevada after several blown red zone chances. San Jose State's going to be another tough test coming into this one, 5-2, with just one conference loss and an easy win over Wyoming last weekend. But I still didn't think Egan looked great in that game either, and the quarterback play is going to have to be great to be able to beat this Fresno State team in their own house. They've got a real solid defense that's shown up every single week except for the UNLV matchup, and at home under the lights, I'm trusting the better quarterback in Mikey Keene, and a better defense with Fresno State to take care of business again here, 31-24. Colorado's on a roll right now, taking care of some decent teams both at home and on the road. This week they'll be tested once again, taking on another quality team in Cincinnati. Brennan Sorsby's been great basically all year long and has the Bearcats tied with the Buffs at 5-2 and 3-1 in conference. For Colorado, Travis Hunter is reportedly doing better this week than last and was pulled from last week's game for precautionary reasons, not due to worsening the shoulder injury he suffered a few weeks ago. Like I said, Cincinnati's going to be a real test for the Buffs, and last week they took easy care of Arizona State team, missing Sam Leavitt. But at home, with some clear difference-making talent showing out this year, I think Colorado continues to push towards Big 12 contention with another win here, 34-28. On to the late night games. It's John Mateer and Washington State on the road at San Diego State. Mateer in this offense dominated Hawaii last week at home, and I'm not really expecting too much to be different this week as San Diego State isn't really that much of a step up in competition. While undefeated in conference play, they've only faced Hawaii and Wyoming, which, by the way, they beat Hawaii at home by just 3 points. I think it's obvious from the two outcomes. Washington State is the clear-cut better group in this matchup. It just depends on if they play like it. This same San Diego State team lost to Central Michigan and was shut out earlier this year by Oregon State. There's no way I'm fading Wazoo's offense, so give me Washington State big, 38-20. The final game of the week comes with Nevada traveling out to Hawaii. Brandon Lewis is ruled questionable for this one right now, and I expect him to likely play. They could use him this game big time as he's been a huge factor to any of their success this season. Both teams enter this one in a must-win scenario with 5 losses on the year, and I'd say Nevada's offense has been playing better football as of late. Entering the year, I was pretty high on Shager and the Warrior offense, but they just haven't found any consistency and took 2 brutal losses to Boise and Wazoo the last 2 times out. Nevada should be a pretty steep decline in level of competition though, and if Lewis isn't 100%, I definitely like Hawaii's chances at home here. I'm going to cautiously take him to get it done, 28-24. That's it for my Week 9 picks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, as well as any of your upset predictions and which games you're looking forward to most watching this week. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.